You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Rick Skinner, Senior Consultant.
For the better part of the last 15 or more years, American educators at all levels have responded to the challenge of increasing students' capacities and numbers in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, what we now know as STEM. Moreover, analyses of past and current enrollments in STEM fields reveal that the numbers of women and persons of color who pursue college degrees in STEM fields remain significantly lower than those of white men. Compounding this condition is the overall decline in college enrollment in recent years that will likely continue through the much of the decade of the 2020s and thus may sustain a 2012 projection by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology that foretold the need for an additional 1 million STEM professionals more than the United States can produce if enrollments in and graduates from STEM fields at the then prevailing rate. The most recent data confirmed that while students pursuing degrees in STEM increased 2.2%, the increase took place as overall college enrollments are in the midst of a long-term decline. The increase, while it's welcomed, therefore made very little of a dent in the shortage of STEM professionals. Moreover, some analyses of STEM data do not include medicine and healthcare. The former is forecast to fall short of needed doctors by as many as 150,000, while the latter is among the jobs for which there will be the greatest demand in an aging America until mid-century. Immigration has been essential to the progress that has been made in filling STEM jobs and also STEM graduate programs, including medicine and nursing. 38% of all licensed physicians in the United States were trained elsewhere, and foreign-born nurses make up 15% of registered nurses in America. The HB1 visa is one way in which a U.S. employer in specialty occupations can bring foreign nationals into the country for 3 to 6 years. And while there are annual caps on the total number of HB1 visas that can be issued, those caps have been exceeded every year because employers can demonstrate the need, and there was something of a consensus until recently that attracting and permitting trained and educated professionals from abroad to come to the United States in areas in which there were sufficient numbers of American students with the skills and aptitudes required was a good thing. That consensus is a fragile one now. It only seems appropriate that much of the discussion about STEM revolves around numbers, and the numbers are important. Today, we want to talk to someone who not only knows the numbers, but also what's at stake when it comes to STEM, and the number of persons required to meet America's needs for people with the skills and aptitude associated with mastery of the STEM fields. Dr. Mónica Bugallo is herself an immigrant. She is professor of electrical engineering at Stonybrook University, where she is honored as an outstanding teacher, a highly productive scholar, and very successful in seeking and securing external grants. Her skills go beyond that of a faculty member to include serving as the Associate Dean in the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences for Diversity and Outreach, and as Academic Director for the Women in Science and Engineering, WISE, Honors Program. Since 2009, Dr. Bugallo has directed different outreach programs, including the Engineering Summer Camp and the Engineering Enterprise for high school and middle school students, in addition to the Student and Teachers Academies for middle and high school students and teachers during the academic year. All these efforts have been very successful initiatives to educate the engineers of the future and support the implementation of the next generation science standards. She is also advisor to the Society of Women Engineers, the Honor Society Eta Kappa Nu, and the sorority Alpha Omega Epsilon on campus. Dr. Bugallo earned her undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degree from Spain's University of Coruna. Welcome to Innovators, Dr. Bugallo.
Thank you.
I'd like to address 3 broad questions about STEM and efforts to improve science and technological learning, increase underrepresented populations pursuing degrees in STEM fields, and graduate more students writ large in those fields. Let me begin by asking, what's at stake for the United States, or any country for that matter, with respect to both scientific and technological learning and students pursuing and completing degrees in STEM fields and then undertaking careers in those fields? What's at stake?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me to this podcast. The topics that you are addressing are extremely important and time sensitive for the future of the engineering or the STEM workforce. To summarize my vision about engineering or STEM education, I would start saying that innovation starts with education. And education currently heavily involves innovation and technology, as we need to adapt education to the next generations of learners. As you very well say, a key factor in maintaining American technological competitiveness is the ability to supply the workforce with engineers or STEM professionals. Unfortunately, students often view science and engineering as inaccessible subjects. Contributing to this view is a general lack of engineering knowledge, limited awareness of K-12 administrators, teachers, and counselors about the engineering field, and a widespread absence of appropriate role models. Research has shown that early exposure to engineering activities can significantly increase students' awareness of engineering as a rewarding career path. We need to engage from an early age students and also teachers in the passion, challenge, and opportunity of engineering, a profession that contributes to social and economic mobility.
How early should that intervention, or what do the data tell us about how early you can begin?
Since they are born. When you see little kids, they are already dealing with their iPhones, iPads. Technology is something that they are born with. So I don't think that there is an age. I think they just naturally are using technology as we use a pencil when we were kids. I have done a lot of work with high school kids first. Then I went to middle school kids, and now we are even offering some of our opportunities to elementary schools because we think that there is a need from the very early ages to just give opportunity. It's not about telling everybody should go to a STEM field. It's just to give them the opportunity so that they can decide.
And that's the reason you chose that word, accessible.
So I think opportunity is extremely important. And I wanted to finish your first question by saying that there is a need to focus on increasing public awareness of engineering, to demystify engineering, and to provide with strong role models and opportunity to underrepresented minorities, to women, and to individuals with low socioeconomic status. So we not only have more professional engineers, but we also have a diverse engineering workforce.
Which we don't now.
Which we don't now.
I want to put you on the spot with this next question. You've come to America, so I'm asking you perhaps to make a judgment that you may feel uncomfortable with, but I think it's an important question. This is not the first time American education has been called to account for finding ways to address societal needs, in some cases spurred by events that take place outside of schools and colleges. So when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, there was an enormous outcry, and public leaders almost immediately questioned whether the nation's educational systems were strong enough in science. And the result of that was the National Defense Education Act back in 1958, which was enacted barely 1 year after Sputnik. That's not usual for Congress to act that quickly. And the language of the act was very unambiguous. So let me just quote that to you. We must increase our efforts to identify and educate more of the talent of our nation. This requires programs that will correct as rapidly as possible the existing imbalances in our educational programs, which have led to an insufficient proportion of our population educated in science, mathematics, and modern foreign languages and trained in technology. But 25 years after the NDA was enacted and the federal role in education expanded, there was a National Commission on Excellence in Education, and it issued a report in 1983, which has the ominous title, A Nation at Risk. And it had the very sobering introduction that our once challenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. While we can take justifiable pride in what our schools and colleges have accomplished and contributed to the United States and the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by, and this is the famous quote, a rising tide of mediocrity. Now, if you include current STEM efforts, then by my count, 3 times in 50 years or thereabout, the United States has taken a close look at the results of efforts to educate the population and found those results to be insufficient. Does that suggest there's something systemic about American education? The fact that 50 plus states and territories and 13,000 school districts are primarily responsible for education, and the central government's role is very slight, or that public education is funded by local governments, often on the basis of property values. And that means that you have rich school districts and poor school districts. So is there something systemic to this problem of America finding it very difficult to align its educational systems with its own societal needs?
So I would say, and I would start answering your question by saying that there is not obviously perfect system. I study in a very different system that is governed by a centralized vision.
Yes.
And therefore, with a more unified education for all. There are also a lot of positive aspects of a more distributed and open education. However, from my perspective as an engineering professor and professional and a passionate educator in STEM, it is concerning that there is not a strong basic education in STEM for all children since a very young age here, and that there are schools that do not offer physics or advanced courses in math and science. I'm not saying that all students should take advanced courses. I'm not saying that all students should go to engineering or to STEM fields. I am supportive of everybody following their passion. However, not having the opportunity to receive a basic STEM education and to also have the opportunity to take advanced STEM courses immediately closes doors to many students to go to engineering and other STEM career paths. Moreover, math and physics are fundamental elements for a good basic education of any student, no matter what is their final destination in their study of choice. So in my opinion, there should be a more unified education in that respect.
And it's strange to me because the efforts that have been made, especially the ones that took place in the late 80s and through the 90s, which looked for a common curriculum, and it based the idea on outcomes, but that became a victim of politics, quite candidly. It no longer had any arguments about education so much as it did about moral questions and political questions. So from your point of view, the education you received in Spain was a superior education in the sense that there was a common curriculum that every child and adult experienced in Spain. Is that correct?
So what I'm saying is that, for example, I studied math since I was basically 4 years old until I graduated from high school. And that once I was 6 years old, they started with science, and then with physics, and then with chemistry, and then physics again, and then chemistry. And the field of physics, just to put an example, is a field that has advanced tremendously. Tremendously, and it is extremely important for most of the engineering careers. However, here, there is only one course on most of the high school study. So basically, instead of offering more courses on physics, they condensate everything and more advances and more everything in one only course. So there is, in my way of thinking, there is no human way that you can just absorb so much material in just one course at the pace that that particular field is advancing. And that is a fundamental course for many careers. So,
if you're going to engineering, medicine, any of that, you're going to need it. So.
Yes. And how do you integrate now some other important fields, like is, for example, computer literacy for everybody? There should be also courses, no matter if you're going to be like an English major in the future. Everybody needs to have computer literacy and should even have fundamentals in programming. Because even if you're going to study music, programming may become a key of your study. So I do think that there should be some kind of guidelines that should be like centralized guidelines for everybody to just give that opportunity that we were talking about at the beginning.
Would it be too much if I drew from that the implication that in the absence of that standard or curriculum, it's likely that we won't be very effective in improving the education? Am I drawing too much of an inference?
Definitely. I mean, and we can see that only like 28%, for example, of the schools in the Bronx offer physics. So
28%?
Around 28%.
Wow.
So that, and we are trying to look for an equal opportunity system, while you were mentioning before that we have what we call the rich and the poor school districts.
Exactly.
And obviously the ones that have more means will offer more courses and more opportunities to those students who happen also to be the ones who at home have more opportunities. While those students who are also brilliant students or can be also like champion as brilliant students do not have that access. And if we have kind of a standard where all the schools are mandated to offer some basic physics and basic math to a certain level, so everybody will have math literacy and physics literacy. I mean, everybody should be a little bit more equal when they try to access to some of the STEM fields.
That's a great segue into my next question. That I started thinking about what you mentioned in the Bronx, and the question was, where are those physics teachers going to come from since students don't pursue majors in physics? So let me pose this question. If at least part of the challenge STEM poses for education has to do with the insufficient numbers of STEM graduates, we don't have enough of those folks coming out of our colleges and universities, where does intervention seem most likely to have the greatest effect and will increase the number of graduates most substantially? And let me press a little more. And which kinds of interventions appear to be the most effective? In other words, what works?
In my opinion, opportunities, role models, and communication and teamwork are key factors. So we need to engage students as early as possible, as I mentioned before, so that they can consider STEM or engineering as a possible career path. And there is not a single recipe. There are studies that are focused on recruitment, and there are studies that are focused in retention in STEM and engineering. But I think that recruitment, retention, and one more factor that I would call partnership. Partnership, I refer to collaboration among entities, among agencies, among campus offices, among school districts and universities to successfully carry out the first two, retention and recruitment, and to sustain programmatic interventions, go all together. And they need to be considered as a path to success. In one of the programs that I was basically asked to lead, that is the Women in Science and Engineering program at Stonybrook University, when I framed the new vision of the program, I made those three goals, recruitment, retention, and partnership, the main core of the mission of the program. And one goes with the other, and The partnership one is the one that makes the other two happen. Engineering education research, also I would say, or STEM education research, is key to study and analyze what better works and to refine best practices and strategies. It is extremely important, in my opinion, to have evidence-based interventions and to study their impact. So we can know what it works better, what it works worse, and that we can have a justification of what our pot of money should go to, basically.
But Bugallo, you mentioned a word that I guess I hadn't considered, but I think I want to pose it to you. You mentioned the importance of teamwork in students learning. To my knowledge, and I'm an old man, but when I first started teaching at a university back in the 70s, I required students to work in groups, and students would tell, when I would get my evaluations back, they would say, I hate working in groups. I don't like to work in groups, and so forth. Why is teamwork so important in the way, in interventions that you think will improve STEM education and success?
Because teamwork brings different perspectives to the table. And when I talk about teamwork in my answer, I'm not only referring to teamwork among students. I am referring to teamwork among students so that they can better come up with a solution to a problem, because each of them will have different strengths, because each of them will bring different cultural background, each of them will bring different interests, different educational backgrounds, different perspectives from their social life. But I'm also referring to teamwork as teams of professionals working together to educate those students. Teams of academic units, meaning departments working with campus offices, working with school districts, working with teachers, counselors, and administrators, to be able to, from the very beginning, create what we can call a super pipeline, where we can all come together and say, like, let's try to give opportunity to these new generations so they can consider STEM as a possible career path. I'm probably anticipating one of your later questions. The problems that we are facing today in the society, they are very complex. Yes. They cannot be resolved by a silo or a solo person or a solo discipline. They are so complex that they need to bring people together from different backgrounds. And those can be students, those can be professionals, those can be academics, but they all need to have teamwork in order to be able to find the most beneficial solutions to even educate those children. So I work with professionals and with academics in social science. I work with people in computer science. I work with professionals from the Career Center. I work with professionals in science education. And we all work together to brainstorm about what are the best practices and the best opportunities that we can offer this next generation of students.
It's interesting. I was thinking a bit about my own education, and I don't ever remember working in groups. Now, admittedly, I'm 1,000 years old, so that was a long time ago. And I'm struck by one of my granddaughters, who's I guess she's 5 years old now. Everything is in a group, and everything is with a team. Teachers work in teams at her particular school and so forth. So it does sound as if you're suggesting that that's another more fundamental change, that we move away from a sort of testing model that says you're on your own, you've got to come up with the answer, you can't seek out help. You're talking about something different than the traditional model of the student being in a competitive environment. Am I right?
Yes, and that is also something that has characterized American education for many years.
Yes.
While I'm coming also from a different culture where teamwork was promoted more.
Yes.
So so that is also a difference in the educational system.
Yeah. A question I think you probably could have anticipated. The underrepresentation of women in STEM is one of its most conspicuous attributes. Right now I'm doing some work in public health, and it's a refreshing change from usually what I find. There are a sizable number of women in throughout the field, but in saying that, it's still about 42%. So it's not a panacea. Are there studies that could tell us whether gender is a global aspect of STEM or something more narrow that's just national cultures? Is this a cultural factor that pervades much of the world, or is this something that's just a nation?
So there are studies that have shown that how women are treated in a specific country has a direct correlation with how girls perform, for example, in math tests. I do not think that there is a single factor related to the low representation of women in STEM. I think that the environment, social biases, college, universities, and workplaces not making enough necessary changes or lack of role models are some factors, and they don't work just as unique factors. There are many studies in this regard, but I don't think that there is a clear, unique factor that can explain this low representation. And I do think that even though there have been advances, and we are seeing that, especially in the latest years, is this representation of women in STEM or in engineering, I think it will take still a long time. And in some of the fields, it will take longer. And I would say that that is related mostly to the lack of role models. You are basically motivated or you are inspired by role models. It's more likely that you will just open up and say, let me try. Let me try.
You need a critical mass.
Exactly. To do it in the right way and not just to fill a quota, which I am against of, is it will take time. Quickly, it cannot be done to reach the 50-50 because that is extremely negative for the people who are really working hard and are successful by their own values and their own value to the field.
Yes.
I do think that reaching the 50-50 in some careers, it will take time, and that is fine. You know, like that is fine. I did my bachelor degree and my master degree in computer science, and then I moved to electrical and computer engineering, and I graduated in my bachelor degree as 4 out of 100.
4 out of 100?
Yes. Probably today is a little bit better, you know, but it will take time to be the 50-50. And I think it will be much more positive to the society and to the workforce if we do it in a system that promotes fairness and justice and really like promotes the value of the people who work in it.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, for the first time, the number of women applying to enter medical school in the United States, women outnumbered men for the first time. We did a little study in which we looked at where were women in terms of being department chairs and deans of medicine. It's not a very pretty picture, but as you say, it's dramatically different than it was just 10 or 15 years ago. So it may be that that's the case. STEM interventions go beyond their impact on students. Some instructors and professors, STEM has become a vehicle with which to integrate the traditional academic disciplines and make learning and research much more inter and transdisciplinary. The best example I know of this, and one I'm very fond of, I must confess, is in the National Academy of Engineering. And it's been quite some time now, it's been over 10 years. they issued what they described as the grand challenges. 14 goals such as secure cyberspace and provide access to clean water, which by design, you could not answer with the expertise of somebody in one field. That just wasn't possible. And it struck me at the time that what that really represented was a way for students to see themselves doing something that involved STEM without actually having to overcome all the concerns and inhibitions that they might have. What do you think about these broad interdisciplinary questions? Or do they mask the complexity of this? Or in fact, do they serve to sort of invite students in and thereby make it, to use your word, more accessible?
So I mentioned before in one previous question that the world is now challenged with complexity. And at the root of the challenges today is the remarkable growth in population.
Yes.
So from today's 7.7 billion inhabitants, it is expected to have 9 billion by the middle of the century. Mm-hmm. And that brings questions and threats that are unprecedented. Sustainability of the planet, global health, climate change. In addition to that, we have the expectation that every generation should have a life as good or hopefully better than the previous one. Mm-hmm. And all these complex challenges require of a level of systems thinking that is unprecedented. So we need to educate those engineers. We need to educate engineers not for only their technical depth, but for being able to think in a new way so that they can address the current challenges effectively and that they see the whole picture and they recognize connections between problems that seem separate. So among the features or the characteristics that the new engineers will have to have is that they should understand the world that is constantly changing. Mm-hmm. They should listen and should prepare. They should understand other professionals in other fields that know about some of these problems so they can help to resolve what is at stake. They should also be forced to just come up with innovation and change wherever they go. And they should be open-minded. They should value fresh ideas. They should listen to diverse perspectives. So there is where we are talking about diversity, and they should understand and practice teamwork. That is what we mentioned before. We mention it now. Teamwork is crucial. We cannot expect that a single person will be able to resolve a complex problem like that.
There's a famous line, I'll interrupt and just say, I don't remember who said it. They said, there is always a simple answer to a complicated question. It's just always wrong. And I think in a way, that's what you were suggesting.
Yeah. So I do believe that multidisciplinary and diverse teams are crucial for innovation and technological advances when we look at the future. And when we look also at how we need to educate our future engineers or our future STEM professionals. Yeah. There are many complex problems that the society will need to address in the near future. And engineers will be crucial and STEM professionals will be crucial to resolve them, but they will not be able to resolve them alone.
By themselves. We always like to ask our guests on Innovators to share with us something you'd like for one of our listeners to take away from this conversation today. We've covered a lot of ground, but are there one or two takeaways you have for us?
I think I could conclude by just mentioning a sentence that led to one publication that I did with a colleague of mine some years ago, that is that engineering should be accessible to everybody, everywhere, and at any time.
That's pretty powerful statement there. Well, if anybody can do it, I think you can. So I'm fairly comfortable. Dr. Bugallo, we want to thank you very much for joining us on Innovators. Continue your work, and we'll be in touch, because I think if anybody's going to make some changes, you're one of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.